A seemingly peaceful morning at Riverside Airport turned into a moment that could change a person's life. A successful but quiet female CEO of color just wanted to board her flight like everyone else. But then, in just a few seconds, an officer's hand was around her neck. Not for security reasons, not for a violation, but because of a prejudice that had been dormant for too long, and at the right moment, flared up violently. But what the officer didn't know was that the woman he despised was carrying a much bigger secret. A secret that could change the whole game, and she had a choice to make: stay silent and endure, or stand up for herself and those who had been silent like her. If you were in that moment, what would you do? Would you dare to look straight at the injustice that choked you? Come join me in this story. A story not just to watch, but to feel. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to fuel more humane stories like this. It was barely past 7 in the morning when the quiet hum inside Riverside International Airport cracked open like thin ice. Travelers were moving with the slow rhythm of a winter crowd, coffee in hand, coats unbuttoned, eyes half awake. Announcements echoed from high above the terminal, the kind of muffled voices no one really listens to until their own flight number is called. It should have been an ordinary Tuesday. But in the center of Concourse B, under bright fluorescent lights that washed every face into the same pale shade, something extraordinary, something violent was unfolding. A woman stood with her palms raised, shoulders tense, eyes steady. She wore a charcoal gray sweater, dark trousers, and simple black flats. Nothing flamboyant, nothing threatening. Yet she was the only one pulled aside from the line, the only one being restrained. Her name was Layla Morgan. And at that moment, a large man in a TSA uniform had one hand wrapped around her throat. Officer Kline towered over her broad chest, tight jaw, small, furious eyes. His fingers dug into the soft skin just below her jawline. His badge glinted under the airport lights. The very badge meant to protect travelers was now being used to wield power against her. "Stop resisting," he growled. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't even moving. Her breath came out shallow, as though it had to squeeze through a narrow crack. But even then, even with her airway collapsing under his grip, Layla's eyes held something that unsettled him. Something quiet. Something he couldn't name. Strength. Not the loud kind, the calm kind. A hush rippled through the people standing nearby. Travelers froze mid-step. Suitcases rolled to a stop. A toddler clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "Mommy, why is he hurting her?" The mother didn't answer. Her face was pale. Someone fumbled with their phone. A shaky voice said, "I'm recording, this isn't right." A young woman, maybe mid-20s, held her phone up high. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop filming. A man beside her muttered, "This is going online. People need to see this." And still, Officer Kline squeezed. Layla's knees softened. Her vision flickered at the edges. She could hear her pulse inside her ears heavy, slow, warning her that she was running out of oxygen. Yet she still didn't fight back. She couldn't, because if she fought even for a moment, she would reveal who she really was. And that reveal would destroy months of work, a covert operation, and potentially put a lot of innocent people at risk. She forced herself to stay still, to endure, to survive the moment without exposing the truth. She was not just a black woman being profiled at an airport. She was a federal asset, operating under the radar for Division 9, one of the most secretive investigative units in the country. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was struggling just to breathe. Her mind flicked back to something her father told her when she was 18, after she'd been harassed by a local cop outside a grocery store. Sometimes, baby girl, our strength ain't in fighting. Sometimes it's in holding on until the world finally sees what they've ignored. That was years ago, but the memory surged forward now, echoing in her chest like a heartbeat. "Hold on. Just hold on." Her lips parted slightly. "Officer, please." Her voice cracked. "I'm cooperating." "Sure you are," he snapped, leaning closer, breath hot and sour. "People like you always have something to hide. People like you. The words sliced deeper than his grip. Layla felt the weight of 1,000 old wounds pressing against her ribs, moments of dismissal, moments of doubt, moments where being a successful black woman meant being seen as an anomaly, as if she didn't belong in the spaces she worked twice as hard to reach. But she swallowed those memories. She refused to let them define this moment. The crowd around them grew thicker. Some people whispered, others gasped. A businessman stepped forward, but his wife pulled him back, whispering something about not getting involved. Fear is a strange thing. It freezes the good and emboldens the cruel. Kline's grip tightened. Layla's vision sparkled with little bursts of white. A faint ringing filled her ears. Then came the sound that would change everything. A voice from the crowd, soft, but clear enough to break through the tension. "Sir, she's not resisting. Please stop." Kline whipped his head toward the voice. "You interfering." His tone crackled with hostility. The man stepped back immediately. Layla, struggling for air, let out a thin breath. She didn't blame the man for backing down. Not everyone was built to confront authority, especially when authority looked like this. Her fingers twitched at her side. She could end this in 2 seconds with a half-circle wrist lock and a pivot. She could have him flat on the floor, disarmed, restrained, helpless. But she couldn't. Her mission, her identity could not be exposed. Not like this. Her lungs clawed for air. She felt the warmth of his hand on her skin, the pressure like a vice. She tried again to speak. "Please, follow the law." Kline's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I'm following it. You're a threat." A threat. Those words struck something deep inside her. Something old, something painful. Her heart pounded harder. Her vision blurred again. A sudden thought flashed across her mind, sharp, alarming, but impossible to ignore. Is this really how my story ends, after everything I've survived, everything I've fought for? Not in some far-off place during a mission, but here, in an airport, under the hands of a man who thinks he can choke the truth out of me. She forced her eyes open wider. No, not today, not like this. Her hand, shaking slightly, moved an inch closer to the inside of her sweater collar. Her thumb brushed against a tiny metal tag hidden in the seam. A silent distress transmitter, only to be used in emergencies. This was an emergency. And suddenly, a woman in the crowd screamed, "Hey! He's choking her! Stop it! She's turning pale." The scream echoed across the terminal. Kline's jaw clenched. He yanked Layla closer, pushing her back into the wall with a thud that sent a vibration through her spine. Her breath slipped entirely for a moment. Darkness crept in around the edges of her sight. Her fingers finally curled around the transmitter, and she pressed it. A soft vibration pulsed beneath her skin. A signal sent. But only she knew what it meant. Only she knew what was coming. Her vision flickered. Her knees buckled. She teetered forward. The crowd gasped in unison, and everything went silent, like the stillness before a storm, like the inhale before a world shifts. Like the moment just before justice wakes up. For a moment, the terminal felt strangely hollow, as if every sound had been swallowed whole. People leaned forward instinctively, their breaths caught mid-air. Layla's knees had buckled, but she hadn't fallen. Not yet. She steadied herself with the back of her hand pressed faintly against the cold wall, trying to bring her breathing under control. Her throat ached sharply with each inhale, like shards of glass were lodged beneath her skin. A faint bruise was already beginning to bloom under Officer Kline's fingerprints. She touched it gently, feeling a pulse beneath the soreness. Someone whispered from the crowd, barely audible, almost trembling, "Is she going to pass out?" Layla didn't look toward the voice. Her vision still flickered like an old film reel, but she forced her body to remain upright. She wasn't ready to give him the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. Kline took one heavy step back, only because the screams had grown louder behind him. His chest rose and fell with a bristling anger. He looked around at the startled faces and cameras pointing at him from every angle. The shift in attention unsettled him. And for a moment, there was hesitation in his posture. His hesitation did not come from guilt, only fear of consequences. Layla lifted her chin slowly, Her voice was barely more than a rasp, but it carried a steady rhythm. "Officer, let me breathe." Her tone had no sharpness, only clarity. A voice grounded in decades of learning to speak calmly in rooms full of people who underestimated her. Kline curled his fingers into a fist. He didn't touch her again, but the fury in his expression grew hotter. "You're making a scene. Cooperate, and this wouldn't be happening." A murmur rushed across the crowd like a soft wave. She wasn't doing anything. He targeted her. She showed her ID. You can't choke someone for asking a question? More phones lifted, more eyes sharpened. For the first time since the assault began, Layla felt something subtle but powerful shift in the air. Not a rescue, not yet, but a collective awakening, small and shaky. As if the people around her were just realizing that silence makes them accomplices. A young man stepped closer, his voice trembling in the space between courage and fear. "Officer," she wasn't resisting. "You can't do that." Kline pivoted, jaw clenched. "You're obstructing law enforcement. Back up before I detain you too." The young man froze. His fingers twitched by his side. His fear won. He stepped back into the crowd. Layla watched him, her breath uneven but steady enough to think clearly now. She didn't blame him for retreating. She didn't judge him. She knew the landscape people walked on when deciding whether to speak up. Some ground felt stable, some felt like thin ice. Not everyone was ready to risk breaking through. She cleared her throat gently, the pain making her wince. "Officer Kline, you need to state your reason for detaining me." He scoffed. "I don't need to explain anything." "You look suspicious." Suspicious how she asked quietly. "Your attitude, your tone, the way you walked up." He snapped. Layla blinked once. "My tone." "You think you're special," he said, "walking like you own the place." She closed her eyes for one brief heartbeat. Only one, enough to steady herself, enough to stop the sting behind her eyes from turning into tears. She had not cried in public in years. She didn't plan to break that record today, especially not in front of a man who believed he was powerful because he could make others tremble. When she opened her eyes again, she felt the transmitter against her collar pulse once in response. The signal had gone through. Her team would arrive soon. She just needed to stay quiet, stay present, stay alive. A soft voice to her right spoke up. "Ma'am, do you need water?" Layla turned. A middle-aged woman stood a few steps away, holding out a small plastic bottle. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes held gentleness. Layla managed a faint nod. "Thank you, but I should stay still. Medical help might be on the way." The woman swallowed, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." The apology wasn't hers to give, but Layla received it anyway. Not because it fixed anything, but because sometimes kindness is the only thin thread holding humanity together in public spaces. Kline stepped forward again, gripping her arm tightly, though he didn't reach for her throat this time. "We're done here. You're coming to secondary screening." Layla's breath trembled, not without cause. "That's it," he snapped, pulling her hard. "You're resisting." Her shoulder jolted. The pain shot down her spine, making her gasp softly. The crowd erupted at once. She didn't resist. "I got the whole thing on video." She asked a question. That's all Kline whipped around. "Put the phones down, all of you." No one moved. One woman held her phone even higher. A teenage boy whispered to his friend, "This is going to explode online." A businessman muttered under his breath, "This officer is out of control." The tension grew thicker, pressing down like heavy humidity before a summer storm. Every second felt longer than the last. Layla closed her eyes again, letting the burst of pain in her shoulder fade. She drew in a slow breath. Her voice dropped to a quiet, controlled register. "I am not resisting. I am standing." Kline's face twisted. "That's enough from you." But he didn't get the chance to pull her any further. A sudden crackle erupted from the officer's radio, clipped to his vest. "Unit 12, stand by. Supervisor en route to your location." The voice was sharp, firm, urgent. Kline stiffened. His fingers slowly loosened on her arm. Layla watched the panic bloom in his expression, small but noticeable. His breathing grew harsher, his eyes darting across the crowd. "Don't move," he ordered, but the command held less strength. It quivered at the edges. She didn't respond. She simply straightened her posture, the pain in her throat making the motion stiff and deliberate. Her eyes remained fixed on him. For the first time, he looked away. Footsteps echoed across the floor from behind the security checkpoint. Heavy, quick, purposeful. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a narrow path. A supervisor appeared, breathing hard from rushing across the terminal. Officer Raymond Holt. He took one look at Layla's bruised neck, her strained breathing, the shaking phones recording everything, and his gaze hardened. "What happened here?" he asked. Voice clipped. Kline opened his mouth, already preparing the lie. She resisted. Layla spoke first. Her voice was a soft thread of sound. "He choked me." A hush washed across the space. Her words were quiet, but carried a weight that pressed into every chest nearby. Not frantic, not angry, simply true. Kline pointed aggressively. "She's lying." A teenager holding a phone piped up. "No, she's not. We saw everything." Another man raised his device. "We all recorded it." The wave of voices grew. Officer Holt lifted one hand. "Everyone stay where you are." He turned to Kline. "What exactly were your grounds for detaining?" Her Kline hesitated. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was acting suspicious. How Holt pressed. Kline stuttered. She didn't cooperate." Layla inhaled, each breath tight and raw. "I complied with every request," she said softly. "He grew aggressive when I asked for the reason behind the search." Officer Holt's eyes narrowed, and the physical force Kline's face reddened. She leaned forward. I had to restrain her. She was reaching into her clothes. Layla's breath hitched. "I was holding my sweater because he pushed me into the wall." Another voice burst from the crowd, loud and unwavering. "She never reached for anything. He grabbed her without warning." More people agreed. Officer Holt looked at the sea of raised phones and trembling voices. He knew immediately that the story wasn't going to bend in Kline's favor. Not today, not with this many witnesses. But 2 seconds later, something else happened. Something only Layla had been waiting for. A discreet buzz reached her wrist. The reinforcements had arrived, and they were already inside the airport. She exhaled slowly, a subtle wave of relief easing some of the tension in her lungs. She didn't smile. She didn't drop her gaze. She simply stood quietly while the first faint edges of justice began to form in the air around her. The storm was coming, and this time, she wouldn't be standing alone. The air around the security zone felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. A quiet tension pulsed through the crowd. People shifted their weight from one foot to the other, unable to look away. Layla stood in the center of it all, her breathing shallow but controlled. Every inhale reminded her of the bruises blooming along her throat, each throb echoing the violence she had just endured. She kept her gaze steady on Officer Holt. His eyes showed uncertainty and calculation, but he was trying to remain composed. That was something she had always noticed about supervisors in stressful environments. They measured every word, every breath, aware that a single mistake could tear a situation open. Kline stood slightly behind him, shoulders rigid, mouth tight with irritation. His anger had shifted into an uneasy defensiveness, the kind that grows when a man senses the first crack forming beneath his feet. Layla exhaled slowly, feeling the faint vibration of her transmitter still tingling along her wrist. Division 9 would move quietly. They always did. No loud entrances, no rushing footsteps. Their presence would slip into the edges of the scene like shadows taking shape. She could sense them even before she saw them. But for now, the silence in the terminal pressed down like a heavy blanket. Travelers whispered, unsure whether to stay or leave. Some held their phones tightly, as though gripping the only weapon available to them. Others looked away, their eyes stinging with guilt, unable to bear the sight of a woman trying to breathe while standing only a few feet from the person who had harmed her. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Ms. Morgan, I need to hear your version of events clearly. Layla nodded. Her voice came out soft and raw. I handed him my identification. He said the system flagged me. I asked to know the reason. After that, he grew aggressive. Holt turned toward Kline. Did you inform her of any flagged item? Kline's jaw twitched. She raised her voice. Layla lowered her gaze, not in submission, but to steady the swirl of emotions rising in her chest. My voice never rose. I simply asked a question. Holt stared at her, and something in his expression softened for a brief moment. He was studying the marks on her neck, the way she held herself, the measured breaths. He was weighing the evidence in silence. Before he could speak again, a gentle tone chimed overhead as another announcement echoed through the terminal. People turned their attention for a moment, though none of them fully heard the words. Their minds were rooted in the unfolding scene. Layla's fingers brushed the side of her sweater again. She wasn't reaching for anything. It was simply a grounding gesture, a quiet reassurance that she was still here, still standing, still in control of herself, even if everything else was spiraling. Her throat ached again. She winced. Kline noticed. You can stop pretending to be hurt, he muttered under his breath. It was a soft statement, but Layla heard it clearly. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time since he laid hands on her, she allowed a fragment of her inner strength to show through her stare. I don't need to pretend, she whispered. He looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Another voice rose from the edge of the crowd. Is someone calling medical? Shouldn't they check her? That bruise looks serious? Layla didn't respond. Her body swayed slightly, fatigue settling into her bones. She steadied herself on the corner of the metal table beside her. Officer Holt stepped closer. We'll get medical to look at you shortly. His words sounded procedural, but Layla could sense the tension behind them. This situation was slipping out of his control faster than he expected. He opened his mouth to continue, but the radio on his belt crackled again. Supervisor Holt, be advised. Federal personnel entering Concourse B for an unrelated matter. Layla closed her eyes for a brief second. That wasn't unrelated. That was her team. Kline's eyebrows furrowed. Federal personnel. Here Holt reached for his radio. Do they need assistance? The response came quickly. Negative. They know where they're going. Layla felt a single breath of relief warm her chest. A subtle shift happened near the far entrance of the concourse. 3 individuals stepped through the wide doorway. They looked like ordinary travelers with neatly pressed jackets and quiet faces, but their eyes were sharp, scanning, calculating. They walked with a confidence that came from years of training and silence. Division 9 always favored the ordinary disguise, blending effortlessly into crowds. They didn't wear suits or badges unless necessary. They carried their authority in their posture and their readiness. The first of them, a tall woman with dark curls pinned behind her ears, spotted Layla almost immediately. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but Layla felt the familiar reassurance wash over her. Officer Holt followed the crowd's gaze. Confusion flickered across his features. Are those the federal personnel? A moment later, the tall woman approached the security zone calmly, her badge tucked discreetly in her hand. She spoke with a poised tone that filled the space without force. Good morning. I'm Special Agent Dana Wells with the Department of Justice. Kline stiffened. Holt blinked in surprise. The crowd leaned in closer. Phones still recording. Agent Wells held her badge for Holt to examine. We're here for Ms. Layla Morgan. Holt's posture faltered. For her, yes. Agent Wells nodded. She's under our jurisdiction. Kline stepped forward, voice thick with confusion and panic. She was resisting inspection. She's suspicious. Agent Wells turned her gaze toward Layla. Ms. Morgan. Are you all right? Layla swallowed with effort. I could use air. Agent Wells nodded gently, then looked back at Holt. Her voice became firmer, yet calm. Please step aside. Holt didn't argue. Kline, however, took a step toward Agent Wells. "You don't understand." She reached inside her clothes. I feared for safety. Agent Wells studied him with a stillness that instantly deflated his bravado. "We have full surveillance logs of Ms. Morgan's current assignment. She has no weapons, no contraband. She has been cooperative throughout her travel process." Kline's mouth opened, then closed again, words trapped behind a rising fear. The second federal agent, a man in a navy blazer, walked up beside Wells. His tone was crisp. "We watched the footage the crowd recorded. What you did was not protocol." Kline swallowed. She was acting suspicious. "No," Agent Wells replied softly. "You were—" The terminal fell so silent that even the distant rolling wheels of luggage sounded loud. Layla's chest tightened with emotion. Not relief, not victory, something deeper. Something she had carried for years, the quiet exhaustion of being forced to justify her existence. Agent Wells turned toward Layla again. "May I check your pulse? You're looking faint." Layla nodded. The agent touched her wrist gently, measuring her pulse with trained precision. "You need immediate medical attention," Wells murmured. "Your airway was compromised." The concern in her tone cracked something inside Layla. She felt a sting behind her eyes, but didn't let the tears fall. She kept her chin lifted. Agent Wells signaled to the third agent, who immediately dialed for paramedics within the airport. Holt stepped closer to Kline. "Officer Kline, we need to discuss your actions." "No," Kline snapped, his voice trembling. "She's dangerous. She triggered some device. I saw her hand move." Agent Wells looked directly at him. "She triggered a distress signal assigned to federal agents. We have the corresponding alert. She used it because she was assaulted." The word assaulted echoed through the concourse. Kline's face drained of color. "But I didn't know she was." "You don't treat civilians like that either," Wells replied. Her voice was soft, but the softness was sharper than any shout. The crowd murmured approvingly. Some nodded, some whispered to each other. Others simply stared at Kline with wide eyes, realizing they had just witnessed something that would ripple far beyond this morning. Layla stood quietly, watching the tide turn. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply breathed, careful and tender breaths, grateful that she could still breathe at all. In the distance, the sound of approaching paramedics grew louder. The storm had finally broken open, and its first drop had already landed. The wail of approaching medical carts slowly filled the concourse. It wasn't loud, but the soft rising hum carried a weight that pressed gently against everyone's ears. People turned toward the far end of the terminal, watching the paramedics weave through the thinning path created by the crowd. Layla remained still, her posture upright but fragile, as though one stronger breeze could sway her. The bruises on her neck had deepened into a darker shade, the outline of fingers unmistakable beneath the harsh lighting. She tried to swallow, but the movement made her throat tighten. Agent Wells stayed beside her, observing her closely with an expression that balanced professionalism and concern. "You're holding yourself well," Wells murmured quietly. "But you don't have to push through the pain." Layla's voice rasped. "I'm all right. Just tired." She lifted her eyes slowly, letting them trace the faces around her, some filled with guilt, some with anger, and others with the uneasy realization that they had witnessed something they would remember for a long time. A few people stepped back now that help had arrived, their bravery settling back into their pockets. Layla didn't judge them. Life had taught her that courage rarely lived in every moment. It showed up when it could. The paramedics finally reached her. A woman with short blonde hair and calm eyes approached first, her tone gentle. "Ms. Morgan, can you hear me clearly?" Layla nodded slightly. "We need to examine your neck and breathing. Is that all right?" Layla nodded again. The motion sent a ripple of pain down her throat. She winced but steadied herself. One of the paramedics lifted a small flashlight and examined her pupils. "Any dizziness?" "Some," Layla whispered. "How's your breathing?" "It hurts," she admitted, her voice raw, "feels tight." Agent Wells folded her arms loosely. She was choked with considerable force. The paramedic's expression shifted instantly, the softness replaced by a sharp professionalism. She pressed 2 fingers lightly under Layla's jaw, checking for swelling. "We need to get her to the medical room. Now." Kline stepped forward at once. "You can't just take her. She's still under Agent Wells," spoke without raising her voice. "She's under federal protection. Officer Kline, she's going with medical." Her words cut cleanly through his protest. Kline's breathing grew faster. "You're making a mistake. She was dangerous. She triggered something. She tried to hide something." Layla looked at him with quiet disbelief. Even now, when evidence wrapped him like a net, he clung to the idea that she was the threat, that she had caused all this. Holt placed a hand on Kline's arm, but the gesture was not gentle. "Enough." Kline jerked away. "You don't understand. People like her always know how to twist things." The terminal fell silent. Agent Wells raised her head slowly. "What did you just say?" Kline blinked, but stubbornness kept his voice steady. "I'm telling the truth." Wells stared at him for a moment that stretched long and heavy, like a quiet cord held in the air. "You assaulted a woman, Officer Kline, and now you're trying to justify it by dehumanizing her." Her voice softened even more, but it was a softness that demanded attention. "Take a breath. Look around you. Do you see anyone here who believes what you're saying?" Kline's eyes darted across the crowd, scanning for support. Not a single person nodded. Not one stepped forward. Every gaze met him with disbelief, disappointment, or disgust. Something in him deflated. Holt exhaled sharply. "Kline, step aside. We'll handle this." The officer hesitated but eventually moved back, shoulders stiff and trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Layla watched all of it, her heart aching in ways deeper than her bruises. She wasn't surprised, not anymore. But the pain of being seen as a threat simply for existing never faded completely. It became an old ache carried quietly through life. She let out a slow breath. The paramedics guided her gently onto a small mobile seat with wheels. As they began moving her away from the chaos, her vision blurred not from dizziness, but from a flood of memories rising too quickly. She remembered the investor meeting at North Star Analytics the year before, when a potential partner refused to believe she was the CEO until she put her business card directly into his hand. She remembered high school teachers telling her to speak less confidently, so people won't think you're arrogant. She remembered being followed around in a boutique store at 16, accused of touching items she hadn't even looked at. She remembered her mother's trembling voice the night she was accepted into her first internship on Capitol Hill. "Baby, you'll do great things. But please be careful of the people who feel smaller when they see you." Those memories pressed together now, forming a quiet heaviness over her chest. She blinked, fighting back the sting in her eyes. She didn't want tears. Not here. As the paramedics pushed her forward, the crowd parted slowly, creating a clear path. Some people lowered their phones out of respect. Others simply watched her go, their expressions softened by the weight of what they had just witnessed. A young woman near the front reached out, touching Layla's hand for only a moment. "You didn't deserve this." Her voice trembled with sincerity. Layla met her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman nodded and stepped back, letting Layla pass. Behind them, Agent Wells remained near Holt, her posture firm. "Supervisor, you'll need to cooperate fully with the federal inquiry." Holt nodded quickly, shoulders heavy with responsibility. "Yes, Agent Wells and Officer Kline is not to make any further contact with Ms. Morgan," Wells added. Kline opened his mouth again, but Holt shot him a stern look that silenced him. A lifetime of authority suddenly felt hollow beneath the world watching him. Layla let her eyelids lower halfway as the paramedics continued pushing her toward the private medical room hidden behind the security zone. The sounds around her blended rolling wheels, soft conversations, distant announcements. It all felt far away, as though she were drifting underwater. But one thought kept her grounded. She had pressed the signal, her team had arrived, and this would not be brushed under any rug, not this time. When the medical doors slid open, Layla was greeted by the scent of antiseptic and the soft glow of overhead lights. The paramedics helped her onto a small bed, adjusting a pillow behind her neck carefully. "You're going to be all right," the blonde paramedic assured her gently. "We're going to check your airway, make sure nothing is damaged." Layla nodded faintly. "Thank you." The paramedic smiled softly. "You're safe now." Safe. The word drifted through Layla's chest like warm breath in winter. She wasn't fully convinced she believed it. Not yet. But it was a start. A thread. Something to hold on to, while the world outside that room shifted and realigned itself. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. Outside, justice had taken its first step. Inside, she allowed herself the smallest moment of rest. The medical room felt smaller once the door closed behind the paramedics. The hum of the terminal faded into a low murmur, soft enough that it felt like the world outside had finally taken a breath. Layla lay still on the narrow bed as the paramedic gently placed a small breathing sensor along the base of her collarbone. Her throat continued throbbing. The pain had settled into a steady ache, sharp at moments when she swallowed but manageable. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, trying to let the tension unwind from her muscles. The fluorescent lights above cast a pale glow that reminded her of late nights working alone at her office, sorting through analytics reports long after everyone had left. The blonde paramedic stood beside her, adjusting the sensor. "Your pulse is coming down." "That's good," she said softly. "The swelling is mild, but you'll feel sore for several days." Layla nodded. "I can handle soreness." The paramedic smiled with a warmth that reached her eyes. "I can tell." There was a moment of quiet as she stepped back to check the monitor. The faint beeping created a steady pattern in the small room. Layla listened to it, letting the sound anchor her. She closed her eyes, but the memory of Kline's hand around her throat returned instantly. Not just the physical pressure, but the look in his eyes. The way he had assessed her, the certainty he carried when he believed he could do anything to her without consequence. A slow shudder passed through her chest. She tried pushing the image away, but it clung to her mind like the imprint of a storm cloud. The door opened gently. Agent Wells stepped inside with careful steps, lowering the volume of her voice before she even spoke. "How are you feeling?" Layla opened her eyes. "Better than before," she said, though her voice was still strained. Wells approached the foot of the bed, posture straight but not rigid. Something about her presence felt grounding, like she was deliberately softening the edges of the moment. "Kline has been escorted to a separate room," Wells said. "He's not allowed anywhere near you." Layla let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It didn't erase the pain, but it offered a small pocket of relief. Wells continued. "The footage recorded by the crowd is being collected. Division 9 has begun a full review. This won't be buried." Layla's gaze drifted to the ceiling. "I've heard that before," she murmured. Wells paused. "I understand your doubt, but this time is different." Layla didn't respond at first. Her thoughts moved slowly, like she was sorting through the remains of the morning. She knew justice often arrived too late, too gentle, too incomplete, but she wanted to believe Wells. She wanted to believe that all the eyes watching in that terminal mattered. Wells stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You handled yourself with restraint most people wouldn't have managed." Restraint. The word carried a weight Layla had lived with for years. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the memories drift. "I've had practice," she whispered. There was no bitterness in her tone, only an exhaustion honed from experience. From years of stepping carefully through spaces where people questioned her authority, doubted her intelligence, or treated her success as an anomaly instead of a result of relentless dedication, Wells let the silence settle before speaking again. "We're bringing in an internal affairs representative. They'll take your statement when you're ready. You don't need to rush." Layla nodded slowly. "I'll speak with them." A soft knock interrupted the moment. The door opened slightly, revealing Officer Holt. He stood in the doorway with visible hesitation, holding his cap in one hand. His shoulders seemed heavier, his voice quieter when he spoke. "Ms. Morgan," he said carefully, "I wanted to check in on you." Layla studied him for a moment. His expression held remorse, but also uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that comes from realizing you failed to act when someone needed you. "I'm healing," Layla replied gently. "Thank you for asking." Holt took a step inside, his gaze lowering. "I reviewed the recordings. I should have intervened sooner." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Layla didn't soften, but she didn't sharpen either. "You did step in," she said quietly. "When you realized what was happening." Holt shook his head slowly. "No, I should have questioned him earlier. I should have listened to you when you spoke calmly the first time." He lifted his gaze with effort. "I'm sorry." Layla watched him, searching the sincerity in his eyes. She wasn't interested in shaming him. That wasn't her nature. And in truth, she had seen worse supervisors. Too many, in fact, who would have defended Kline no matter the evidence. So, she offered him a soft nod. "I appreciate the apology." Holt exhaled, relief flickering across his face. "I'll fully cooperate with the federal team. Kline's behavior, it cannot continue." He stepped back toward the door, lingering a moment longer before slipping out. When the door clicked shut behind him, the room fell quiet again. Agent Wells returned her attention to Layla. "You handled that with grace." Layla gave a faint smile. "Grace is easier than anger. Anger takes too much air." Wells let out a quiet breath, as if the sentence reached deeper than she expected. "You don't have to carry this alone." Layla looked away. "I've carried worse." Wells didn't push. She simply sat in the chair beside the bed, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her presence felt steady, like a lighthouse guiding ships through dark water. After a long silence, Layla finally asked, "What happens next?" "We'll document everything." Wells replied, "Your statement, the witnesses, the recordings. Kline's conduct will be addressed at the federal level. You'll have protection until the investigation concludes." Layla let the words wash over her. Protection, conclusions, investigations. She had been through these processes before, but always from the outside. As a CEO, she had investigated misconduct. As a covert agent, she had handled classified inquiries, but she had never been the center of one. It felt strange, exposing, heavy. Wells tilted her head slightly. "There's something else," she added gently. "Your role with Division 9 will require us to classify your involvement in a way that protects your undercover status." Layla nodded. "That's necessary, but it also means the public narrative will adjust," Wells said. "The story will be about the assault and misconduct, not about who you really are." Layla released a slow breath. "That's all right. I don't need them to know what I do. I only need them to know what he did." Wells smiled softly. "That's a powerful way to put it." Layla leaned her head back against the pillow. "Truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be seen." The paramedic returned with a small cup of warm water. "Take small sips," she instructed. Layla accepted it with both hands, lifting it carefully to her lips. The warmth soothed her throat, easing the ache. Wells rose from her chair. "I'll step outside for a moment. The internal affairs representative will arrive shortly." Layla nodded. "Thank you." "Agent Wells." When Wells stepped outside, the medical room settled into a quiet hum again. Layla closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the water spread through her. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a small flicker of calm rising in her chest. Not complete peace, but the early whisper of it. A space inside her where resilience could breathe again. And she knew the story unfolding outside that quiet room was far from over. The knock on the door came gently, almost hesitant, as if the person behind it already sensed the weight in the room. Layla lifted her gaze from the rim of the water cup she'd been holding and watched the door slide open. A woman stepped inside, dressed in a neatly pressed dark suit. Her steps were measured, calm, almost careful. She carried a slim folder under one arm and a small recorder in her hand. A quiet authority surrounded her, not the kind worn loudly, but the kind that settled into a space and rearranged the air. "Ms. Morgan," the woman said softly. Layla nodded. "Yes." "And you are?" "My name is Lillian Grant," the woman replied. "Internal Affairs, Department of Civil Enforcement. May I come in?" Layla allowed a faint smile. "Of course." Agent Wells reappeared behind Grant, giving Layla a subtle reassuring nod before leaning against the wall near the door. Grant sat in the chair beside Layla's bed. Her palms rested calmly on top of the closed folder. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply observed Layla, as though attuning herself to Layla's emotional temperature. "I want to begin by saying," Grant said softly, "I'm here to ensure your account is heard, documented, and protected. You'll have full control over what you share. If at any point you need a break, just tell me." Layla studied the woman's eyes. They were steady, attentive, and unwaveringly present. That presence gave Layla permission she didn't know she needed. "I'm ready," Layla said quietly. Grant gave a small nod and placed the recorder on the bedside table. She clicked it on, the soft beep cutting through the stillness of the room. "This is Agent Lillian Grant, Department of Civil Enforcement, taking a formal statement from Ms. Layla Morgan. Time stamp 11:56 a.m. Grant folded her hands again, leaving space for Layla to begin. "Ms. Morgan," she said gently, "could you walk me through what happened?" Layla inhaled slowly, letting the breath settle in her chest before she spoke. Her throat still ached, but she held her voice steady. "I arrived at Riverside International early this morning," she began. "My flight was scheduled to depart before noon. I went through the usual pre-check procedures with no issues. After that, I headed toward the gate." Her eyes drifted toward the blank wall across from her, as if replaying the moment on its surface. "When I reached the boarding area, I noticed a tension in the line. People looked unsettled, but I didn't know why at first. I took my place behind a mother with a toddler and tried to stay focused. I didn't expect anything unusual." Grant nodded, her expression soft. And then she prompted. Layla swallowed, the soreness flaring slightly. Then Officer Kline approached. He wasn't screening everyone, only certain people. People who looked different, I suppose. The word carried layers, but Layla didn't force them. They floated naturally, quietly. "He asked for my identification," Layla continued. "I complied. He began questioning me about my travel, about my profession. His tone became increasingly hostile. He searched my bag without cause. He threw my belongings on the ground." Her voice wavered slightly at the memory. "Not out of fear, but out of the deeply familiar sting of humiliation." "I tried to stay calm," she said. "I've dealt with men like him before. I know the difference between protocol and aggression." Grant's jaw tightened subtly, but she didn't interrupt. "He escalated," Layla said quietly. "When I asked him to explain the reason for the secondary search, he took offense. He stepped closer. I attempted to keep distance, but he grabbed my arm. I pulled back on instinct." Her breath slowed. "Then he accused me of resisting. The silence that followed was heavy." Grant's voice came out softer than before. "And then he put his hand on your throat." Layla didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes, letting the memory arrive, letting it move through her. "Yes," she finally said. "He did." The room felt colder for a brief moment. Even Wells shifted her stance against the wall, the tension radiating through her shoulders. He applied pressure. Layla continued. He leaned his weight into it. His fingers were tight enough that I couldn't breathe properly. People around us shouted. Some stepped forward. Others froze. She exhaled shakily. I remember thinking, not again. Grant lifted her eyes. "Not again," she asked gently. Layla held the question in her mind, contemplating whether to speak the truth behind it. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "When you're a black woman in America," she said, "you learn early which kinds of situations can turn dangerous. And you carry the memory of those moments. Even when they're not life-ending, they become life-shaping." Grant nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the words without rushing past them. I understand, she murmured. Please continue when you're ready. Layla drew in a long breath. He kept choking me. Officer Holt intervened eventually. A few passengers recorded what happened. Once they pulled Kline off, the situation spiraled into a crowd. I was taken here for evaluation. Grant gave a small nod. Thank you, Ms. Morgan, she said. Your clarity helps us tremendously. She reached for the folder but didn't open it yet. There's something I'd like to ask, Grant said more quietly. It's optional. You don't have to answer if it's too difficult. Layla's eyes lifted. What is it? During the assault, Grant asked, choosing each word with care. What were you afraid of most? Was it the physical danger or something deeper? Layla's breath caught. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup, knuckles whitening. Wells shifted her weight again, as though bracing herself for whatever truth would come next. Finally, Layla spoke. I wasn't afraid of dying, she said softly. I was afraid of not being believed. Grant closed her eyes briefly, letting the words sink. Layla continued, her voice quiet but unwavering. I've built a company, I've led teams, I've mentored young women who follow behind me, and still, one man's assumption was enough for him to treat me as less than a person. And I knew the moment he touched me that he fully expected the system to protect him, not me. A trembling breath escaped her, and that's what terrified me. The room remained silent for several moments, as if honoring what had just been spoken. Grant finally reached for the folder. Ms. Morgan, she said, her tone thick with sincerity. Your words will not be dismissed. Not this time. She clicked off the recorder. Layla leaned back against the pillow. Tears she hadn't even realized were gathering, slipping quietly to the corners of her eyes. Not from pain, from release. Grant closed her folder and stood. I'll return soon with updates, she said gently. Please rest. When she exited the room, Wells approached the bed slowly and placed a hand over Layla's. You did more than give a statement, she whispered. You spoke the truth that so many never get the chance to say out loud. Layla squeezed back, her voice almost silent. Then I hope someone hears it. Wells nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet promise. They will. The hours that followed stretched in a way that only hospital quietness could create. The medical room remained softly lit, curtains drawn halfway, letting in a muted glow that turned the space into something neither bright nor dim. Just somewhere in between, a place where people waited, a place where breath was measured, and time felt slower than the hallway outside. Layla sat upright now, resting against a stack of pillows. Her breathing had steadied, though each swallow still reminded her of the force that had been used against her. Her mind drifted between clarity and heaviness, as if moving through clouds that refused to settle. Agent Wells lingered near the corner, reading a document on her tablet. She looked up occasionally, checking on Layla with a quiet attentiveness. There was no pressure in her gaze, only presence, a kind of support that didn't demand words. Layla closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the faint murmur of distant footsteps outside the room. The rhythmic beep of the small monitor beside her bed matched the slow rise and fall of her chest. She felt tired, but not the kind of tired that sleep could solve. It was deeper, sitting under the ribs, where memory and ache intertwined. A soft chime sounded from Wells' tablet. Wells straightened. That should be the preliminary review report, she said, stepping toward the bed. Her tone was cautious, but hopeful. Already, Layla asked. Her voice carried a mixture of surprise and fatigue. Wells nodded. The crowd recordings helped. A few passengers gave immediate statements. Internal affairs moved quickly because of the severity. Layla let out a slow breath. Good. Wells glanced at the screen, scanning the top lines. Her expression shifted slightly, drawing in concentration, then something like resolve. There's an issue, Wells said softly. Layla opened her eyes fully. What kind of issue? Wells lowered the tablet, choosing her words carefully. When Kline was questioned, he gave a very different version of events. Layla stared at her, though she didn't seem surprised, only weary. Of course he did. she murmured. Wells continued. He claimed you were aggressive, that you tried to push past security, that he acted in self-defense. Layla closed her eyes, inhaling slowly through her nose. Wells added, he also said you threatened him, and that you reached into your bag. Layla opened her eyes again, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. He's fabricating entire scenes. Yes, Wells said gently. He is. Layla sank deeper into the pillows. She wasn't shocked, not truly. She had seen systems bend to protect those who misused authority, but knowing it didn't soften the sting of hearing it. After a few moments, Layla asked quietly, and what does Internal Affairs think? Wells pulled a chair closer and sat down. They don't believe him. The footage disproves most of what he said, but the fact he's building a counter-narrative means the process may become more complex. Layla pressed her fingers lightly against her temple. Complex, she repeated. That's one word for it. Wells studied her face. Are you all right? Layla gave a small nod, though her eyes remained distant. I'm just tired of certain patterns repeating. Tired of being questioned first and believed second. There was a long pause. Wells didn't try to fill it. She let it exist, the way someone might let rain fall without rushing indoors. A few minutes passed before the door opened again. Officer Holt stepped inside with careful movements, as though approaching a room where quiet was sacred. He removed his cap and held it respectfully at his side. May I come in? Layla nodded, her expression neutral but open. Holt's face looked different from earlier, more lined, more aware. I heard about the report, he said slowly, and I know what Kline is claiming. I wanted you to know I've already submitted my own statement. I told them the truth, every part of it. Layla watched him cautiously. You didn't have to come here to say that. Holt shook his head. I did, because I know my hesitation earlier. It contributed to the moment escalating, and after reviewing the recordings, I realized just how wrong he was. I should have seen it sooner. Layla's voice softened slightly. Seeing it late is still better than never seeing it at all. Holt swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. You deserved better protection than what you got. Layla didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied him as though measuring the sincerity behind every syllable. Then she offered a small, weary smile. Thank you, she said. Holt exhaled, relief loosening his shoulders. I'll stay available for any hearings. And, Ms. Morgan, if you ever need anything that I can provide, you just let me know. His eyes held a humility that hadn't been there before. Layla nodded again. I appreciate that. Holt stepped out quietly, leaving behind a silence that felt warmer than the one before. Wells turned to Layla. People can change, she said gently. Sometimes slowly, sometimes because something forces them to see what they ignored. Layla's voice dropped into a soft murmur. And sometimes the cost of that change falls on people like me. Wells didn't argue. She simply placed her hand gently on Layla's arm. You're not alone in this, she said. Another knock sounded at the door. This one firmer, more formal. Agent Grant entered the room holding a new stack of documents. Her expression carried the crisp seriousness of someone ready to deliver important news. Ms. Morgan, she began, I've completed the review of the initial evidence. And there's something we need to discuss privately, if you're comfortable. Layla nodded, though a flicker of apprehension crossed her face. What is it? Grant set the documents on a small rolling table and pulled up a chair. One of the witnesses came forward with a high resolution. Recording, she explained, much clearer than the others. It captures the entire incident from the moment Kline approached you. Layla's hands tightened slightly. Grant continued. Because of the angle, the footage also captured something unexpected. Layla exchanged a glance with Wells. Grant took a quiet breath before explaining. It shows Kline checking his phone moments before he approached you. The video zoom picks up part of the message he received. Layla frowned, a message Grant nodded slowly. Yes, and it appears someone encouraged him to target you. Layla's heart thudded once, heavy and slow. Wells stiffened. Are you saying Kline acted on instruction? Grant met her eyes directly. That's what we need to determine. Layla felt a cold wave ripple through her chest. She had expected prejudice, expected misconduct, expected denial. She had not expected coordination. Grant lowered her voice. We don't know who sent the message yet, but the number was masked, and the phrasing suggests familiarity with your movements. Layla's breath faltered. My movements? Grant nodded. Yes. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Layla stared at the floor, her mind moving through possibilities faster than her pulse. She had lived long enough to know when something was more than coincidence, more than bias, more than ego. This was intentional. Wells leaned forward, her voice steady and low. Layla, do you think this could be connected to your work with Division 9? Layla didn't speak at first. She looked up slowly. Eyes sharp, though, exhaustion clung to her. It might be, she whispered. And if it is, we're not dealing with one man's prejudice anymore. Grant folded her hands, the room tightening around her words. That's why we need to proceed carefully, she said. This investigation just became larger than an assault. Layla exhaled, the sound fragile yet controlled. Then tell me, she said quietly. What's our next step? Grant and Wells exchanged a meaningful look. And in that moment, Layla knew the path ahead would be far more complex than she had imagined when she first stepped into the airport that morning. The air in the medical room seemed to thicken after Agent Grant's revelation. Something invisible settled over the space, the kind of hush that follows when a quiet truth grows into something larger and far less simple. Layla felt it in the way her breath slowed, in the faint tremor beneath her ribs, in the instinctive heaviness that pressed against her chest. She had known prejudice. She had faced hostility. She had endured suspicion. But what Grant described was something else entirely. It was precision, intent, direction. Agent Wells stepped closer to the bed, her expression sharpened by concern. Layla, she said quietly, this isn't random? Layla nodded once, her gaze fixed on the faint reflection of light on the water cup in her hands. I know, she murmured. Grant pulled a chair closer, settling into it with a kind of patient gravity. We isolated the sequence frame by frame, she explained. From the moment Kline receives the message to the moment he locks eyes on you, his entire posture shifts. His attention narrows. It's deliberate. Layla inhaled slowly. And the sender, she asked. Grant shook her head. We've sent the number through rapid trace protocols, but the masking is advanced. Whoever did it knew how to hide. Wells crossed her arms thoughtfully. That level of concealment isn't typical for a random civilian looking to cause trouble. Grant nodded. Exactly. Layla let her eyes drift toward the closed door. Somewhere beyond it. Travelers walked to their gates, rolling suitcases behind them, sipping morning coffee, chatting about vacations. Life continued in its casual patterns. Meanwhile, inside this room, everything felt suspended, as if the walls carried a secret that no one outside could sense. She closed her eyes for a moment. Someone knew I'd be here, Layla whispered. Someone planned this. Grant leaned in gently. Ms. Morgan. If you're aware of anyone who might want to target you professionally or personally, we need to know. Layla kept her gaze lowered, her thoughts drifting through names she rarely spoke aloud, people she had confronted in boardrooms, competitors who resented her influence, former partners who envied her rise, but none of them fit this kind of tactic. Only one area made sense, her covert work. She opened her eyes slowly. There is a possibility, she said carefully. Wells sat down beside her. Take your time, she urged. Layla's fingers tightened slightly around the cup. There was an operation 3 months ago, she began softly. Division 9 was monitoring a data trafficking network. High stakes, high secrecy. We dismantled part of it, but there were complications. Grant listened intently. Complications, she asked. Layla nodded. Someone inside the network escaped before we moved in. We never found them. They had deep access, anonymous contacts, and the resources to disappear completely. Wells straightened. You think they found you? I don't know, Layla replied. But the timing, the precision, the masked number, it aligns too well. The room fell still again. Grant folded her hands slowly. If this is connected to that operation, we may need to classify this entire investigation at a higher level. Layla exhaled deeply, grounding herself. I didn't want this morning to reach that scale, she whispered. I just wanted to board a flight. Wells's voice softened. You didn't choose this escalation. Someone else did. Layla felt the truth of those words sink into her. It settled like a stone beneath her sternum. For years, she had learned to navigate dual worlds, the public world of a CEO, polished and composed, and the unseen world of covert operations, where shadows held more information than faces did. She had always kept the two separate, always maintained distance. Now, someone had crossed that line. Grant cleared her throat softly. There's something else. Layla lifted her gaze, bracing herself. The timestamp of the message, Grant explained, matches the exact minute you passed through the first checkpoint at the airport. Layla's eyes widened slightly. That means someone was tracking my movement in real time. Wells exchanged a serious look with Grant. That's surveillance capability, Wells said. Not coincidence? Grant nodded. Layla felt a cold ripple trace its way down her spine. Her throat tightened again, though this time it wasn't from injury. How much danger am I in? She asked softly. Grant didn't answer immediately. She chose her next words with precision. Enough that we can't dismiss this as isolated misconduct. Enough that your safety is now a priority at the federal level. Wells touched Layla's hand gently. You will not face this alone, she said. Division 9 already has protocols in place. We'll activate them. Layla nodded, though unease still pressed heavily against her chest. Grant stood. I'm going to coordinate with the cybersecurity team, she said. We'll begin the trace. It may take hours, but we'll get a lead. She paused at the door, then added, Ms. Morgan, your cooperation is invaluable. Rest if you can. We'll return with updates. When she left, the door eased shut with a soft click. The room returned to its muted quiet. Wells sat beside Layla, watching her carefully. What's going through your mind? She asked in a gentle tone. Layla's eyes drifted toward the window, where light filtered through the curtain in pale stripes. I'm thinking, she whispered, that every time a piece of truth comes out, something larger hides behind it. Wells nodded slowly. That's often how it works. Layla let her shoulders relax against the pillows. Though her mind was anything but calm, I didn't expect my past work to follow me into a public space like this, she said. I worked so hard to keep the two worlds separate, to protect the people around me, to live a life where I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of grappling with truths she'd kept buried. Wells leaned forward. You've carried more weight than anyone knows. Layla let out a breath, steady but quiet. That's what leadership is, she replied softly, carrying weight without letting the people around you feel how heavy it truly is. Wells studied her for a long moment. You don't always have to carry it alone. Layla looked at her, and something in her eyes softened ache blending with gratitude. Before either of them spoke again, a soft vibration buzzed from Wells' phone. She glanced at it, her brows tightening. Report from the cyber team, she said. Layla straightened, bracing. Wells read the message slowly, then looked up with a seriousness that made Layla's pulse quicken. They just found something? Layla's voice barely rose above a whisper. What is it? Wells swallowed. The masked number. It was rerouted through a server used previously by the same network you helped investigate. Layla's heart dropped. And, Wells added, her voice even quieter now. The sender attached a geoping. Layla felt her stomach tighten. They were tracking your exact location, Wells said, within a margin of a few feet. Silence fell heavy across the room. Layla's breath slowed as the truth settled. This morning's assault had never been about profiling. It had been a message. Someone had wanted her vulnerable. Someone had wanted her exposed. Someone had wanted her out of balance. And they had nearly succeeded. Wells placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We're raising your protection level," she said, starting immediately. Layla closed her eyes, not in fear, in acceptance, because she knew now that her past had not only returned, but stepped into the open. And whoever had sent that message wasn't finished. Not yet. The room had grown quieter since the last update, but the quiet no longer felt neutral. It carried weight now, a heaviness that lived between breaths and paused between words. Layla sat a little straighter in her bed, as if her posture were the only thing holding her steady, while her thoughts moved beneath the surface like unsettled waves. Agent Wells remained beside her, one hand resting loosely on the rail of the bed. She wasn't speaking, but her presence had become a kind of anchor. Layla could feel it, the way someone senses a familiar warmth in a dim room. She let the silence linger for several long minutes before she finally spoke. "Dana," she said softly. "If they were tracking me, then they wanted to provoke something today. They wanted to push me into a situation where I looked unstable, or dangerous, or guilty." Wells nodded slowly. "Yes. They wanted to compromise you." Layla's gaze drifted toward her hands, still faintly trembling from the earlier shock. "Or destroy my credibility," she murmured. "In both of my lives." Wells sat down in the chair again, leaning forward with a gentle firmness. They didn't succeed. Layla remained quiet for a moment, staring at a crack in the ceiling paint, small and barely visible unless the light hit it a certain way. "That's the thing," she whispered. "People like them don't need full success. They only need a moment. One moment to twist everything." Wells studied her, noticing how Layla's voice carried not fear, but a kind of weary recognition. The recognition of someone who had spent years maneuvering through rooms where trust was fragile and assumptions were already waiting like loaded traps. Before Wells could respond, a knock sounded at the door. It was firmer than before, but still polite. Agent Grant stepped inside, clutching a tablet and a small, secure drive. Her expression told Layla everything there was news, and it wasn't simple. "Ms. Morgan," Grant said as she approached. "We have preliminary findings." Layla inhaled softly. "Please, tell me." Grant set the tablet on the side table and pulled up the report. The glow from the screen illuminated her features, casting faint reflections in her eyes. The geo-ping attached to the mask number was programmed to activate only once. She began. "It tracked your position through the airport for less than 3 minutes before shutting off entirely." Layla frowned. 3 minutes, Grant nodded. "It means whoever sent it didn't want to leave a digital trail. They waited until you entered a controlled area. The moment you stopped near gate C-27, the ping shut down." Wells leaned forward. "They needed your location only long enough to direct Kline." Grant nodded again. "Exactly." Layla let the information sink into her. 3 minutes? Enough time for someone to watch her movements, identify her position, and choose the perfect moment to strike at a place where security cameras were abundant and crowds were unpredictable. She swallowed, the ache in her throat intensifying for a brief moment. "So, someone used him," Layla whispered. "Someone manipulated his bias to create an incident." Grant hesitated. "There's more." Layla's chest tightened. "Go on." Grant pulled up an image on the tablet, a blurred screenshot extracted from the witness's recording. It showed Kline glancing at his phone, the message partially visible. Layla leaned forward slightly. The words were fragmented but clear enough to understand the intent: target, boarding zone, disrupt, ensure she. The rest was unreadable. Wells exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "Ensure she." They meant harm. Grant locked the screen, or something equivalent. "It indicates they didn't want you to reach your destination." Layla rested her head back against the pillow, her eyes drifting to the dim light above her. She felt the weight of revelation settle into her bones. Her voice, when it came, was quiet yet filled with restrained depth. "I knew the network had resources," she murmured, "but this is too precise, too bold," Wells asked gently. "Do you believe the person who escaped the operation would go this far?" Layla closed her eyes. There was someone, she whispered. Someone who knew how to exploit people. Someone who didn't need loyalty to influence them. Only vulnerability. Wells watched her carefully. What was their role in the network? Layla hesitated. A long moment passed before she answered. They were an intermediary, she said slowly. A broker of information. They connected criminal groups with corrupt officials. They trafficked data, identities, movement logs, anything that could be sold. Grant exchanged a glance with Wells. Then they could have accessed your travel information. Layla nodded, the realization tightening in her chest. Yes. Her voice dropped to an almost hollow softness. They know how to find people. The room fell into silence, thick with implication. Then Wells placed a steady hand on Layla's arm. We'll locate them. You're not a target they can reach easily, especially now that we know. Layla turned her head slightly toward her, her eyes softening. I believe you, she said quietly. But this morning, it reminded me how quickly things fall apart when someone chooses violence over truth. Wells tightened her grip just slightly, a gesture of reassurance. Grant stood again, organizing her files. I have a team analyzing airport logs, she said. We're looking into any suspicious access points or badge activity that might connect to the masked number. It's possible someone used internal systems. Layla's brows drew together. A plant. Grant nodded. It's a possibility? Layla exhaled, absorbing yet another layer of complexity. Do you realize, she murmured, how many people passed me today without knowing I was in danger? How many stood feet away while someone watched me through a screen? Wells replied gently. They're not trained to see what you see, but we are, and we will. Layla's eyes burned gently, not with tears, but with a deep, aching clarity. I don't fear for myself, she said. I fear for what this means, for how far they've reached into places they should never touch. Grant stepped closer, her tone softened by understanding. You've been carrying this fight for a long time, haven't you? Layla looked down at her hands. Yes, she whispered. Grant nodded slowly. It shows. Layla lifted her gaze, and for the first time since the assault, she allowed the vulnerability in her chest to rise to the surface. I just wanted one morning where I was simply a woman traveling, she said, voice trembling slightly. Not a target, not a symbol, not a threat in someone else's story. Wells leaned closer. And you deserve that, she said firmly. Layla closed her eyes, letting the words settle. A moment later, Grant spoke again. We've arranged temporary relocation protocols, she said. Once we finish your medical evaluation, we'll move you to a secure facility until we determine the threat level. Layla nodded, though the idea weighed on her. Security meant isolation. Protection meant vigilance. And both meant stepping deeper into the shadows she had hoped to leave behind. She whispered quietly, then, let's do what must be done. Wells placed a hand over hers, steady and warm. You're not alone in this, she repeated. Not anymore. For the first time that day, Layla let herself believe it. The hallway outside the medical room had grown busier, though the sounds remained muffled through the closed door. Rolling carts hummed across the polished floor. Quick conversations floated by and faded. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed briefly before the sound dissolved into the steady rhythm of airport life. Inside the room, however, everything felt still. Layla sat at the edge of the bed now, one hand resting lightly on her knee for support as she breathed through a dull ache that pulsed beneath her skin. Her throat no longer burned sharply, but every swallow reminded her of the imprint of Kline's grip, a memory carved into tender flesh. Agent Wells stood near the curtain, speaking quietly into her phone. The dim light caught strands of her hair, softening the determined set of her features. She ended the call with a simple thank you before tucking the phone into her jacket pocket. They're preparing the relocation route, Wells said gently as she approached Layla. 2 vehicles, 1 decoy, 1 actual transport, short distance, about 12 minutes. Layla nodded, though her eyes were still distant, processing everything that had unfolded. 12 minutes, she echoed softly. Close enough to feel simple. Far enough to recognize nothing is simple anymore. Wells pulled a chair close. You've been quiet, Layla offered a small, strained smile. I'm trying to understand the shape of this day. It keeps changing on me. Wells frowned slightly. What do you mean? Layla's gaze drifted toward the closed door, as if seeing something beyond it. This morning, she said slowly, the story was about a man who abused his authority. Something ordinary in its tragedy, familiar in a way that hurts even more because of how often it happens. Her eyes lowered, then it shifted. It became about coordination, about someone watching me, about someone using another person's prejudice as their tool. She drew in a breath, and now it feels like the ground beneath everything is moving. Wells listened in silence, letting the words unfold without interruption. Sometimes, Layla continued, I wonder if I've spent too much of my life waiting for the next shift, anticipating it, preparing for it. As if I couldn't allow myself one uncomplicated morning, Wells placed a gentle hand on her forearm. You deserve uncomplicated mornings, she said. You deserve safety that doesn't need to be negotiated. Layla looked down, her shoulders tightening with emotion. The world doesn't always give that to women like me, she whispered. Wells' eyes softened. Then we carve it out ourselves, and we surround you with people who understand how to protect it. Before Layla could respond, the door opened quietly. Agent Grant entered holding a secured tablet and a small case. Her expression was tighter than before, carrying a seriousness that made the room sharpen. Ms. Morgan, she said, we need to brief you before transport. Layla straightened. I'm listening. Grant moved closer, setting the case on the bed beside her. There's been new movement on the mask number, she said softly. Someone attempted another trace block 20 minutes ago? They weren't expecting us to track this fast. Wells's eyes narrowed. A countermeasure, Grant nodded. Yes, but an imperfect one. And that imperfection gave us a sliver of information. Layla leaned forward, every muscle tightening in quiet anticipation. Grant lowered her voice. We've identified the region the signal originated from. Southern Nevada, not far from the abandoned facility your team raided. Layla inhaled sharply. The same region, she murmured. They never left. Grant held her gaze. It appears so. Layla felt something settle inside her. A realization. A confirmation of an unspoken instinct that had simmered beneath the surface for months. They're rebuilding, she whispered. Grant didn't deny it. We believe so. And you were one of the few who could recognize their work. That makes you a threat to them. Layla closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the truth. When she opened them again, determination flickered through the lingering exhaustion. What does relocation involve? She asked calmly. Grant retrieved a small ID from the case. Temporary identity, limited movement, secure housing for 72 hours. After that, we reassess. Layla nodded, though a faint ache ran through her chest. I have a company to run, she said softly. Wells replied gently. We'll handle the public side. Your team will think you extended your trip. A simple explanation. Layla exhaled, accepting the arrangement even as part of her resisted the idea of hiding. I don't like disappearing, she admitted. You're not disappearing, Grant said firmly. You're preserving yourself long enough for us to dismantle what's coming. Layla lifted her gaze to her, something resolute forming behind her eyes. Then let's move, she said. Grant signaled to someone outside. The door opened again, revealing 2 federal escorts. They remained respectfully silent, waiting for instructions. Wells helped Layla stand, steadying her gently when her balance wavered. The ache in her throat was matched by a subtle soreness in her chest. Not from injury, but from the emotional toll that had accumulated hour by hour. When Layla took her first few steps, each movement felt deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. She followed the agents into the hallway, moving slowly, but with a steadiness that surprised even her. The hallway lights cast elongated shadows across the floor as they walked. 2 nurses stepped aside, whispering quietly but respectfully as the group passed. Layla didn't look at them. Her gaze stayed forward, focused, as if the very act of moving demanded her full attention. Grant walked beside her. "You'll be safe," she said quietly. Layla offered a small nod. "I trust your team." Wells walked slightly behind, scanning the hallway with subtle precision. As they approached the elevator, Layla's pace slowed for a moment. She turned to Wells. "Dana," she said softly. Wells stepped closer. "Yes." Layla hesitated, searching for the right words. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for believing, for not looking away." Wells's expression softened with something like quiet pride. "I wouldn't walk away from you," she said. "Not now. Not ever." Layla held her gaze for a moment before stepping into the elevator. The doors slid shut with a soft hum. Inside the small space, the lights buzzed faintly. Layla breathed slowly, listening to the sound of her heartbeat as the elevator descended. When the doors opened again, a private underground corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit and cool. 2 vehicles waited at the end, dark-tinted and prepared for immediate departure. The air smelled faintly of fuel and cold concrete. Grant stepped forward. "Left vehicle is the decoy," she said quietly. "Right one is ours." Layla nodded and moved toward the correct vehicle. Before she climbed inside, she paused. Her reflection in the tinted window stared back at her eyes, tired but fierce. Posture slightly slouched but unbroken. She placed a hand briefly on the glass, as if grounding herself in the truth of who she still was beneath everything a woman shaped by resilience, not by the harm inflicted upon her. Then she entered the car. Wells followed, sitting beside her. The door closed with a quiet thud that sealed the space around them. As the engine rumbled to life, Layla leaned back and whispered, barely audible, "Let the truth come." Wells turned her head gently toward her. "It will," she replied, "and when it does, we'll face it together." The vehicle rolled forward into the tunnel, carrying Layla toward safety, toward answers, and toward a confrontation she could feel rising on the horizon. The road that stretched ahead of the transport vehicle felt impossibly long, though the trip itself lasted only minutes. Layla sat by the window, watching the light shift across the tinted glass. The outside world blurred into muted shades of gray and pale blue, familiar yet distant, as if she had slid into a space where everything moved but nothing touched her. Inside the car, silence held steady, not tense, not cold, just filled with the unspoken weight of everything that had happened. Agent Wells sat beside her, hands folded loosely in her lap. She didn't attempt conversation. She sensed Layla's need for quiet, a quiet where thoughts could rise slowly, like fog pulling itself from the surface of dark water. The vehicle hummed gently along the underground ramp before emerging onto a restricted access road. The sunlight filtered through the windows, softer now, as though the world itself felt the need to tread lightly. Layla breathed evenly, though each breath carried lingering stiffness along her throat. She lifted a hand and pressed her fingertips gently beneath her jaw. The tenderness made her wince. Wells noticed. "Does it hurt more?" she asked softly. Layla shook her head. "No, it's manageable, just a reminder." Wells lowered her gaze. Sometimes the reminders outlast the wounds. Layla didn't reply. She let her hand drop to her lap and exhaled, long and quiet. The escort vehicle ahead maintained a steady pace, the decoy staying close enough to confuse any distant watcher. Layla watched the brake lights flicker as they neared an intersection. "You're thinking hard," Wells murmured. Layla turned her head slightly. "I'm trying to understand something." "What is it?" Layla rested her elbow on the armrest, her voice low. "When Kline grabbed me, I felt 2 things. Shock and anger, yes, but also something else, something older, something I've carried since the first time someone dismissed me because of my skin, or questioned my authority, or doubted my competence." Wells listened without interrupting. "It wasn't the violence that shook me," Layla continued softly. "It was the familiarity. That moment where someone looks at you and sees less than a person. where they justify harm because they already decided you deserve it. Her voice trembled faintly, and realizing he wasn't acting alone, realizing someone used that part of him to reach me, that's what unsettled me the most. They saw the same pattern. They counted on it. Wells shifted closer, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not your burden to carry alone. Layla looked at her gently. I know, but it still lands on my shoulders. The car turned onto a private connector road leading toward a secured complex. Guard booths lined the entrance, their tinted windows reflecting the midday light. Razor-straight trees flanked each side, standing tall like silent sentinels. Layla watched them pass, their shadows flickering across her face. Wells spoke again. You're stronger than you think, Layla answered softly. Strength and exhaustion can look very similar from the outside. They both fell silent again. A few minutes later, the vehicle slowed as they approached a large security gate. A line of reinforced fencing stretched into the distance. The area was quiet, almost too still, as if insulated from every sound beyond it. Grant's voice crackled through the vehicle's communicator. Clearance confirmed. Proceed to Bay 4. Wells reached for the door handle. We're here. A soft mechanical whir signaled the gate sliding open. The car rolled inside, guided toward an underground entrance. The tunnel swallowed them in cool shadows. The overhead lights glowed faintly, reflecting on the hood of the vehicle. When they stopped, the rear door opened from the outside. 2 federal officers waited, respectful and alert. Wells stepped out first, then extended her hand to Layla. Take your time, she said gently. Layla accepted the support, lowering herself from the vehicle slowly. Her legs felt steady, but the weight of the day pressed deeply into her joints. The corridor ahead was lit with soft white panels that cast no harsh shadows. Grant approached from a nearby doorway. How was the ride, she asked. Quiet, Layla replied, and necessary. Grant nodded. We've secured a temporary suite, 2 rooms, surveillance only from authorized channels. You'll have privacy, though the halls are monitored. Layla offered a faint, appreciative smile. Thank you. Grant's expression softened for the first time since the airport. You're handling all this with more composure than most would manage. Layla gave a small shrug. I've had years to practice grace under pressure. Wells and Grant guided her through the corridor. Each step echoed softly against the tile, the sound steady, rhythmic. Layla felt her heartbeat gradually aligning with the slow cadence of her footsteps. They entered a small elevator that rose only 1 floor before opening into a quiet, well-lit residential section. Soft carpeting muted each step, and the walls were painted in warm, calming tones, a deliberate contrast to the sterile environment she had just left. Grant gestured toward a door at the end of the hall. That will be your temporary suite, Wells added. I'll be staying next door. My team will rotate shifts. Layla nodded with gratitude. Inside the suite, soft, natural light filtered from a large window. The living area was minimal but comfortable, with a small sofa, a table, and a private bedroom. A simplicity that felt unexpectedly soothing. Layla stepped into the room slowly, letting her eyes travel across the furnishings, grounding herself in the new environment. Wells closed the door behind them. You're safe here, she said softly. Layla moved toward the window, resting her hand on the sill as she looked out at a small enclosed courtyard. A single tree stood in the center. Its branches were still bare from the season, but the core looked strong, roots invisible but steady. She found herself staring at it for several moments. It's strange, Layla said quietly, how quickly a day can divide your life into a before and after. Wells approached slowly. Which part are you standing in now? Layla smiled faintly, the expression tinged with sadness and strength. The part in between. Wells nodded gently. That's usually the hardest part. Layla turned from the window and sat on the sofa, folding her hands in her lap. Agent Grant, she said, when will we have more information? Grant replied, our cyber division is still working the trace. We should have the next update in a few hours. Layla looked down, a flicker of unease passing through her expression. And if the signal originated near that old facility, we'll handle it, Wells assured her. But we won't move without knowing the full picture. Layla nodded again, though her shoulders remained stiff. Grant stepped toward the door. I'll let you rest for now. Please use the communicator if you need anything. When the door closed, silence returned. This time, it felt gentler. Wells sat beside her. You don't have to put on the strong face right now, she said. Layla lowered her head. I don't know what face I'm supposed to put on, she whispered. Everything feels raw. Wells placed a hand on her back. Slow and warm, then just breathe, she said. That's enough. Layla did. She inhaled deeply, letting her lungs expand, letting the tension loosen in small, gradual increments. And as she exhaled, something inside her softened, not surrender, but a quiet acceptance that the road ahead would require all the courage she had learned to carry. Outside the window, the solitary tree swayed gently as a breeze passed through the courtyard. Layla watched it move. It stood alone, yet it stood firmly. Night settled quietly over the secure compound, softening edges and dimming every harsh line that daytime had carved. Through the window of her temporary suite, Layla watched the courtyard fade into a watercolor blend of dark blue and charcoal. The lone tree stood still, its outline faint against the dim lights embedded along the perimeter. Inside the room, only a single floor lamp glowed, spilling a gentle circle of gold across the carpet. Layla sat on the sofa with her knees drawn slightly inward, her ankle resting over the other. She held a warm mug, not because she needed the tea, but because the simple weight of it eased her nerves. She had always trusted silence. Even tonight, silence felt like a soft blanket she could wrap around herself. Yet beneath that calm, thoughts kept stirring, refusing to be still. A light knock sounded on her door. Layla didn't look up right away. She closed her eyes. Yes, she finally said, her voice steady, though quiet. Agent Dana Wells eased the door open and stepped inside. She carried a tablet under one arm and wore a look Layla recognized instantly. Something had shifted. Is now a good time? Wells asked gently. Layla nodded. Yes, please. Wells came closer, pulling a small chair forward so she could sit opposite Layla, close enough to speak softly without raising her voice. She placed the tablet on her lap and took a slow breath before beginning. The cyber team finished another sweep. Wells said, There's something you need to hear. Layla set her mug down. Good or bad? Wells hesitated. It's information? I'm not sure where it falls yet. The pause afterward made the room feel heavier. Wells tapped the tablet, bringing up a map riddled with colored markers. We traced a second signal, not the main one from the airport. This was an auxiliary ping that triggered the decoy alert inside the scan machine. Layla listened without blinking. It originated from a location 20 minutes from here. Wells continued, a storage facility off Briarwood Avenue. Layla's chest tightened. Briarwood, she murmured. I know that area. Yes, Wells said quietly. You do? Layla leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her knees. Someone wanted to get my attention. Or pull you out, Wells added softly. Layla closed her eyes for a moment, collecting herself. Memories she had tried to bury began stirring. Heavy footprints in her mind, resurfacing with unwelcome clarity. Wells noticed. Layla. What's there? Layla slowly opened her eyes. A building I haven't seen in almost a decade. She reached for her mug again but didn't drink, simply holding it in her hands. It used to be a warehouse for North Star's early projects. She continued. Before we grew, before we earned our first major contract, before I became anyone that people had to respect. There was bitterness in her tone, not directed at Wells, but at a version of the past that hadn't faded. And after we moved, Wells asked, Layla's voice softened painfully. I leased the building to a small logistics firm, a company founded by someone I cared about once. Wells didn't interrupt. The name doesn't matter now, Layla said. We parted ways. He made choices I couldn't follow. I learned later he struggled financially, got involved with partners who didn't care about ethics. It was complicated. She inhaled slowly. I shut down the lease and let the building sit empty. I wanted to forget it even existed. Wells processed her words carefully. Do you think he might be involved? Layla lowered her gaze. Not willingly. But the building, it holds pieces of my past. Ones that might appeal to someone trying to get inside my head. A beat passed. And someone is definitely trying, Layla added. Wells placed the tablet on the table between them. There's more, she said. 2 sets of footprints were recorded at the site within the last 48 hours. One resembles the tread used by port facility contractors. The other, we're still analyzing. A faint tremor fluttered in Layla's chest. Do we know what they planted there? She asked. Not yet. But they accessed the building's old panel. Whoever it was, they knew the structure well enough to bypass external locks. Layla leaned back, rubbing gently at her temple. My father helped me fix that panel the first time after I bought the building, she said. I was 26. I remember standing on a crate with a flashlight while he tightened the wires. I remember him telling me that every door in life needed an inner lock, a layer of protection no one could reach unless you let them. Her voice softened as though she were speaking from somewhere far away. Seems someone found the inner lock anyway. Wells looked at her with concern. You're thinking about going there, she said. Layla didn't deny it. I can't rest while there's a part of this puzzle sitting in a place I once called mine. Wells shook her head gently. It's not safe. You need rest. You need time. What Layla needed was clarity. But she didn't say that aloud. We're not ruling out a connection to Kline's handler, Wells said. Whoever planted that signal knew how to trigger the exact moment the officer's bias would explode. They counted on him. They counted on you being alone. They counted on the shock becoming public. Layla's fingers curled slowly around the edge of her mug. They counted right, she whispered. No, Wells said, leaning forward. They underestimated you. And we're going to prove that. Layla looked into Wells's eyes, steadier now. What's our next step? I've dispatched a team to secure the building, Wells answered. They'll sweep it tonight. You're not stepping foot near that site until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Layla accepted this, but not without a flicker of frustration. Wells seemed to read her thoughts. I know you want to face this head on, she said, but you're not alone in this investigation. You don't have to be the one carrying every burden. Layla smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and ache. Old habits, she said. Outside the window, a gust of wind brushed the courtyard tree. Its branches quivered, then settled again, like a breath being released. Wells rose from her chair. I'll be next door, she said. Try to rest for at least a few hours. We'll regroup at sunrise. Layla nodded. When Wells left, the door clicked softly behind her. Layla leaned back on the sofa and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, but sleep did not come. Instead, her mind drifted toward Briarwood Avenue, toward the dust-coated floors and the walls that still held traces of the early years of her dream, toward the echoes of footsteps that did not belong there anymore. She pictured her father standing behind her the day they fixed that panel. He had smelled faintly of oil and cedar, his voice warm, his hands steady. Every lock, Layla, she whispered into the dimness. Eventually meet someone willing to test it. The room remained still, but she no longer felt alone inside it. The clock on the wall glowed a muted shade of amber, its hands moving slowly across the dimness of Layla's suite. It was well past midnight, yet the air felt awake, almost expectant, as if the walls themselves listened for what might come next. Layla lay on top of the neatly folded blanket, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Her body was tired, but her mind refused to settle. Thoughts drifted in scattered directions, drawn to pieces of the day she wished she could forget, and pieces she feared she might have to revisit. A gentle hum of ventilation filled the silence. Outside, the courtyard tree swayed slightly, its silhouette shifting against the pale security lights. Layla finally pushed herself upright, planting her feet on the floor. The carpet under her toes felt warm, grounding. She crossed the room and opened the curtain a little wider. The courtyard stretched quietly below, serene and untouched. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it reminded her of how quickly peace could be an illusion. She whispered to herself, "Why Briarwood? Why now?" There was no answer, only the faint rustling of leaves. A soft knock sounded at the door. Layla turned quickly, tension flickering across her shoulders. "It's Dana," a gentle voice said from the other side. Layla opened the door. Wells stood there, wearing a simple dark sweatshirt instead of her usual blazer, her hair slightly loosened, shadows beneath her eyes revealing the toll of the day. "Couldn't sleep either?" Layla asked, managing a tired smile. Wells shook her head. "I heard you moving around, thought you might want company." Layla stepped aside to let her in. They settled on the sofa, each taking a moment to breathe before speaking. The lamp beside them cast a soft pool of light, making the room feel smaller, almost intimate. "You okay?" Wells asked softly. Layla wrapped her arms loosely around herself. "I don't know if that's the word I'd choose." "What word would you choose?" Layla thought for a moment. Unsettled, she finally said, "Alert, like my mind is standing at the edge of something it recognizes, but can't fully name." Wells nodded slowly. "That's normal. Everything today was too much for one person." Layla drew a slow breath. "It's not just today. It's what today revealed." Wells tilted her head gently. "You want to talk about it?" Layla hesitated, then spoke with a quiet vulnerability she rarely allowed. "When I was starting North Star, I had this fear that people wouldn't see me, not my work, not my vision, just me. A black woman who should have known her place." Her voice softened, "And many of them treated me exactly like that. But I kept building, and every step forward felt like pushing against a door someone kept trying to close." Wells listened without moving, giving Layla the space she needed. "Now," Layla continued, her words trembling, "someone used that same door, not to block me, but to get to me. They saw the prejudice. They saw the pressure points. They saw the bruises that never fully heal." She pressed a hand gently to her throat, the memory resurfacing sharply. "And they used it." Wells reached out and placed a steadying hand over hers. "That's not on you," she said, voice warm and sincere. "Their cruelty doesn't define your worth. It never has." Layla met her eyes. "I know, but knowing and feeling aren't the same." Wells squeezed her hand gently. "No, but feeling is allowed, especially tonight." Layla exhaled shakily, her shoulders loosening just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. A brief silence passed before Wells spoke again. "The team should be arriving at Briarwood soon," she said. "We'll have an update shortly." Layla's gaze sharpened. "I want to know everything." "You will," Wells promised. "But for now, let your mind rest where it can." Layla looked back toward the window, watching the faint ripple of branches. "I can't shake the sense that there's something personal in this," she said. "Something directed at me specifically, not just my work, not just my role." "Why do you think that?" Layla hesitated, then answered slowly. "Because whoever did this didn't target my company. They targeted me as a person. The anonymous call, the manipulation, the timing, all of it leads back to someone who studied me, someone who understands pressure points." Wells frowned thoughtfully. "That narrows the list. Too much," Layla responded, "and not enough." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with unspoken worry. Then Layla's communicator buzzed softly on the table. Wells reached for it quickly, scanning the message before handing it to Layla. "It's Grant," she said. "The team just reached the building." Layla's pulse quickened. She read the message silently. "Entry secured. No resistance. Signs of recent activity. Will update." Her fingers tightened around the small device. Wells watched her carefully. "You want me to stay until we get the next report?" Layla nodded. "Yes. Please." Wells settled back against the sofa, her presence quiet but steady. Layla leaned slightly toward her, allowing a rare moment of vulnerability. She didn't rest her head on Wells's shoulder, but the distance between them closed enough for Wells to sense the trust forming there. Minutes passed. The room felt suspended in time, wrapped in soft shadows and the faint hum of the building. Layla closed her eyes briefly, focusing on the rhythm of her breath. Then the communicator buzzed again. Wells reached for it, but Layla lifted a hand, signaling she wanted to see it herself. She unlocked the screen. One sentence stared back at her. "We found something." Layla swallowed, her heart tightening. Wells leaned closer. "What is it?" Before Layla could answer, another message arrived. "Old project files. Hidden behind the wall panel. Your name appears in the metadata." Layla felt the air leave her lungs in a sharp exhale. "They found my files," she said softly. Wells froze. "You mean North Star files?" Layla shook her head slowly. "No. Older ones? Files from when I worked freelance data recovery before North Star even existed." Her eyes widened with realization. Someone must have taken them when the building was leased. Wells's expression darkened. "Why hide them now?" Layla looked up, her face pale but steady. "To send a message," she whispered. "Someone is reminding me that they know where I came from, and they know what I left behind." Another message came through. "Found a second compartment. Something else inside." Opening it now, Layla held her breath. Seconds stretched. Then the next message appeared. "It's a burner phone. Only one contact saved." Wells tensed. "Whose number?" Layla read the final line slowly. A number registered under a name that made her blood run cold. J. Morgan. Her father's initials. Her hand trembled. "It's him," she whispered. "It's connected to him." Wells stared at her, stunned. "Layla, what does that mean?" Layla closed her eyes. "It means this isn't just about me." Her voice deepened into something more haunted. "It's about my family." Silence filled the room, heavy and electric, as if the walls themselves leaned forward to listen. The night outside remained still, but inside Layla, something shifted. The past she thought she had buried was rising again. For a long moment, Layla simply stared at the screen in her hand. The glow of the communicator illuminated her face, catching the tremor in her jaw and the tightness around her eyes. The room felt smaller, quieter, as if everything inside it sensed that something irreversible had just cracked open. J. Morgan, her father's initials. After several seconds of stillness, Layla lowered the communicator slowly, letting her hand rest on her knee before she trusted herself to speak. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured. Wells leaned toward her carefully, as if approaching a wound she didn't want to press too hard on. "Layla," she said gently, "you don't have to explain anything right now." But Layla shook her head. "I do," she whispered, "because I need to hear it aloud before I can understand it myself." She leaned back against the sofa, her shoulders sinking under an invisible weight. The soft light of the lamp caught the faint sheen of worry in her eyes. "My father," she began, drawing in a slow breath. "He worked his entire life to stay away from trouble. He believed safety came from routine, from hard work, from being invisible in the places that mattered." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "He didn't chase power. He didn't gamble. He didn't owe anyone. He barely left the city for years. The idea of him being connected to anything like this is..." She exhaled shakily. "Impossible." Wells sat beside her fully now, not crowding her, but offering quiet presence. "Numbers get reused," Wells offered softly. "Names get borrowed. People get impersonated. We can't assume the worst." Layla closed her eyes. "I know. But my father, he was careful. He didn't let his information float around. Even after he passed, I kept everything locked. Documents, records, anything with his name on it." She swallowed hard. "So, how did his initials end up on a burner phone hidden in a building I used to own?" Wells didn't answer. Not because she lacked ideas, but because Layla didn't need theories. She needed space. Layla leaned forward, elbows on her knees, pressing her fingertips gently to her forehead. "I'm missing something," she said. "Something small, something obvious, something I overlooked." Wells watched her silently, recognizing the shift. Layla's voice wasn't panicked. It was searching, almost analytical. What was your father doing the last year you had the warehouse? Wells asked cautiously. Did he visit it often? Layla shook her head. No, he helped me renovate the wiring once. After that, he said the place had too much dust to breathe properly. A soft, sad smile touched her lips. He used to joke that the air tasted like abandoned dreams. The memory warmed her briefly before dissolving. But he never went back after that. Not as far as I know. A thought flickered across her mind like a spark. Unless... Wells leaned closer. Unless what? Unless he wasn't there for the building, Layla said slowly. Unless he was there for me. She looked at Wells, eyes wide with a painful understanding. Maybe he left something behind. Something I never discovered. Something he didn't want anyone else to find. Wells absorbed this with a thoughtful frown. And someone found it before we did. Layla nodded. The realization didn't comfort her. If anything, it made her chest tighten even more. The communicator buzzed again. Wells reached for it, but Layla gently placed her hand on top of Wells's, stopping her. I need to read this one, she said quietly. Wells released the device. Layla lifted it and read the new message. Opening second compartment fully. There is a sealed envelope, your father's handwriting on the front. Layla's breath caught. Her heart thudded weakly against her ribs, not in fear but in something deeper, something like grief pulling itself back into the present after years of silence. She whispered, No! Wells placed a steady hand on her arm. What does it say? Layla swallowed. They found an envelope, with his handwriting. Wells didn't speak. She waited. Layla blinked quickly, trying to steady her breath. My father never wrote letters. She said, he wasn't that kind of man. If he had something to say, he said it right then. Direct. Simple. She pressed the communicator against her chest. If he left something written, then it must have been important. Another message appeared. Do we have permission to open it? Layla stared at the question. For several seconds, she didn't move. Wells leaned in gently. You don't have to decide right now. Layla shook her head. No, I do. She typed slowly. Open it. Tell me exactly what it says. Wells exhaled softly, steadying herself for whatever was coming. Layla placed the communicator on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, waiting. Seconds stretched out like minutes. A soft vibration broke the silence. A long message began to appear line by line. Wells moved closer, reading as Layla read. The envelope contained a note. It's addressed to you. The handwriting reads, For Layla, not yet. The message inside is short. We will send it now. Layla felt her pulse climbing. She flexed her hands, trying to steady them. Then the next message arrived. Layla, if you are reading this, then something has reached you before I could. There are things I protected because I did not want them to become your burden. But you've always been brave enough to face the things I could not. Layla froze, breath caught in her throat. Wells whispered, Layla. She shook her head, unable to speak. Another line appeared. I kept one truth hidden because I thought it died with me. But someone else knew. Someone who watched me long before I realized it. Wells' eyes widened. That's not right, she said. Your father wasn't involved with anything dangerous. Was he? Layla didn't answer. Her mind was moving too fast. The next line arrived. Be careful who you trust. Even those who seem close may have their own shadows. Layla pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The silence in the room deepened. Then the final line appeared. When the past returns to you, remember this. You were always the strongest part of my story, and you are the only one who can finish what I began. Layla set the communicator down as if it weighed far more than she could hold. Wells touched her arm. Layla! Talk to me. Layla's voice emerged as a whisper. My father? He knew something. Something he hid. Something someone else wanted. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back slowly. her voice deepening with an echo of grief and strength intertwined. And whatever it was, it didn't die with him. Wells leaned back, shock and concern mingling across her face. Layla, this changes everything. Layla turned toward the window. The courtyard tree swayed again in the night breeze, its branches moving like an old memory stretching awake. She whispered, "I think my father left a warning, and I think the person we're dealing with knew him long before they came after me." Wells inhaled sharply. "Do you believe someone from his past is connected to the attack on you?" Layla shook her head slowly. "No, not just his past." Her voice grew quieter, deeper. "Our past." The room fell silent again, heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. This time, Layla didn't look afraid. She looked ready. For a long moment after reading her father's final words, Layla didn't move. She stood near the window, the soft glow from the courtyard lights tracing the outline of her silhouette. The communicator lay untouched on the table behind her, its screen dimming slowly as if even the device understood it had carried something heavier than circuits were meant to hold. Wells watched her with quiet concern, hands folded loosely in her lap, giving Layla space to absorb whatever storm had risen beneath her calm exterior. "Layla," Wells said softly. Layla didn't turn. Her voice emerged low and steady, almost too quiet for the room. "I thought I understood the shape of my past, its boundaries, its lessons, even its ghosts." She exhaled, the sound shaky but controlled. "But I didn't know there were doors my father left unopened. I didn't know he feared someone enough to write a warning." Wells approached slowly, stopping beside her. "We don't know who he meant," Wells said gently. "Not yet." "I know," Layla replied. "But the fact that he wrote it at all means he believed something was unfinished." Her eyes drifted upward, toward the faint reflection of her own face in the window. "He knew someone was watching him," she whispered. "He knew there was a shadow following him, long before I ever suspected anything." Wells placed a careful hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this," she said. "You won't face any of it by yourself." Layla nodded, though the expression on her face revealed she hadn't fully accepted comfort yet, not because she didn't want it, but because she didn't know where to place it. After a quiet moment, Layla moved away from the window and sank onto the sofa. She clasped her hands tightly together, grounding herself. "What do we know about the phone?" she asked. Wells sat across from her. "Grant is having the data extraction team analyze it," she said. "Burners don't usually hold much, but the contact listing alone is enough to justify a deeper sweep." Layla nodded again. "Did they say where the envelope was hidden?" she asked. Wells shook her head. "Not yet. But the fact that it was concealed inside an inner compartment. Someone took great care to place it there." Layla's voice dropped to a whisper. "Or great care to keep it from me." Wells frowned. "You think your father was hiding something from you?" Layla hesitated. "No," she said finally. "Not hiding. Protecting." Her gaze lifted, softening with memory. "My father was gentle, but he wasn't naive. He grew up in a world that required vigilance. He taught me that danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited quietly, pretending to sleep." Wells leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "Layla, did he ever hint at anything unusual during your childhood? Anyone suspicious? Someone who showed too much interest in him or in you?" Layla searched her memory, brows drawn together. "There was a man," she said slowly. "He used to come by the shop where my father worked. He never bought anything, just watched, talked too little, smiled too long." Wells listened intently. "My father didn't interact with him much," Layla continued. "But every time he walked in, my father would become tense. He'd place himself between the man and me. Subtle things, small gestures, enough to notice, not enough to panic." "What happened to him?" Wells asked. "One day, he stopped coming. My father didn't say why. He just told me to be careful with people who linger without reason." Wells nodded thoughtfully. That describes half the people who raise red flags in our line of work, she said. Anything else? Layla hesitated, then shook her head. No, but I recognized the feeling I had around him, the quiet alertness, the pressure behind my sternum. She pressed a hand lightly to her chest. It's the same feeling I've had since the airport. Wells's expression sharpened. You think the same person might be involved? Layla shook her head gently. No, the timelines don't match, but the pattern, the intention, the familiarity of the threat, it feels inherited. Wells absorbed this silently. After a moment, Wells stood and approached the door. I'm going to check for updates, she said. Grant should have more information about the building search. Layla nodded. When Wells left, Layla leaned back on the sofa, closing her eyes. The exhaustion of the past days pressed against her, but beneath the weariness, something else stirred, a strength she had inherited from her father, a strength that had been buried under grief until now. She whispered to the empty room. If you wanted me to finish what you started, Daddy, then I will. The communicator vibrated again. Layla opened her eyes and reached for it. This time, it wasn't Grant. It was an unknown number. For a moment. Layla considered calling Wells back before answering, but something inside her said she needed to face whatever this was on her own terms. She accepted the call. The line was silent at first. A soft static filled her ear. Then a voice she didn't recognize spoke. You move faster than I expected. Layla's spine stiffened, but she kept her breath steady. Who is this? She asked evenly. The voice ignored her question. You shouldn't have sent them to Briarwood. Layla's pulse quickened. Why, she asked calmly. Because the past wasn't meant for second hands. The voice replied, It was meant for you. Layla swallowed, forcing herself to concentrate. You planted those files. You planted the phone. A soft exhale came through the line. Not quite a laugh, more like amusement held on the edge of patience. You always were observant, the voice said, just like him. Layla's blood ran cold. You knew my father. Another quiet breath. I knew him better than you think. Layla stood slowly from the sofa, her body tensing with a mixture of fear and determination. What do you want from me? She asked. What was owed? The voice said. Layla kept her voice steady. You need to be clearer than that. A pause. Then the voice lowered slightly. He left something unfinished, and you're going to finish it for him. Layla clenched her jaw. I don't take orders from shadows. This time, the voice did laugh. We both know you'll come. You inherited his curiosity, his instincts, his courage, and the same threat that found him has now found you. Layla's breath caught. What threat she demanded. Tell me what he was running from. The voice grew quieter, almost whispering now. He wasn't running. He was waiting for the right time to tell you the truth. Layla's heart pounded. What truth? The line buzzed softly. You already know the first part, the voice said. Now you must find the rest. The call ended abruptly. Layla stared at the silent screen, her breath shaking, her pulse throbbing in her throat. Wells burst into the room a moment later. Layla! I heard a signal spike. What happened? Layla looked at her with eyes full of something fierce and alive. Someone called, she said, and whoever they are, they knew my father. Wells froze. What did they say? Layla turned toward the window once more. The courtyard trees stood motionless now, as if listening. They said my father wasn't running from the past. She swallowed, voice deepening. He was waiting for it. Wells stepped closer, realization dawning, waiting for you to be ready. Layla nodded slowly. And now, she whispered, the past is coming for me. The room fell into heavy silence, but Layla no longer looked lost. She looked prepared. Layla Morgan's story is more than just one black woman being treated unfairly at an airport. It's a mirror of so many things we've all experienced, moments of being doubted, overlooked, judged simply because of who we are, and not because of what we've done. The most valuable thing that the story conveys, perhaps, is that Layla chose to stand tall, despite her fear and hurt. That strength is not a scream, it is not violence. It is a quiet determination that only those who have suffered can understand. And it is that calmness that opens the path to justice, helping to expose the dark corners that society sometimes tries to see as normal. Like Layla, there are times in our lives when we have to face our fears. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being hurt, fear of standing up. But sometimes, just one courageous choice is enough to change not only our fate, but also the fate of those who come after us. I hope this story helps you regain faith in goodness, in speaking up, and in your own ability to heal. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If the story touches you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to build a community that listens, shares, and looks at each other with kindness.